All righty. Big stuff going on with the FCC when it comes to ownership of local television stations like NTV, like other stations you may watch here in Nebraska. And I'm lucky enough to have a chance to speak with the president and CEO of the NAB today, Curtis LeGeyt, to see where everything stands and what could be changing in the future under the Trump administration. Sir, thank you so much for giving me a few minutes.
Really happy to be here and appreciate the attention of this important issue.
In the information that you folks sent me was talking about how Senator Pete Ricketts, as well as I believe Congressman Adrian Smith, Mike Flood, and Don Bacon, all signed on to letters in both the Senate and the House, basically wanting to look into the whole idea of expanding the 39% cap. Before I get to what Pete Ricketts told me yesterday, the day before we recorded this, tell me about the 39% cap so people understand what that means.
Yeah, Congress and the FCC created these rules decades ago to limit the number of stations that any one company can own, both nationally and locally. And these rules derive from an era where broadcasters only competed against other broadcasters, meaning local television stations only competed against other local stations for audience. So policymakers wanted to ensure that there was a diversity of voices in the marketplace, and some restrictions were set up to do exactly that. And they were extremely successful over the course of decades. But now we enter a world in which consumers have unlimited choices, and advertisers who ultimately enable the business that allows your viewers to have access to our programming have a lot of choices as to how they're going to advertise their product, and increasingly local broadcast stations are left out in the cold because these global behemoths, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, as well as the cable programmers, can just offer something that we can't. And so we need to fairly compete on a level playing field with these tech platforms, and some modernization of these ownership restrictions, I think, will enable us to do that.
So here's some of what Senator Pete Ricketts had to say to me one day prior to me getting a chance to speak with you.
When I was governor and somebody had a proposal, what I asked them to do is come back with a business case on how to approach it. And if the FTC is looking at changing that, what I want them to do is come before Congress and make the case as to why they think we should be changing these rules. I think there's a benefit to why those rules were put in place in the first place, to make sure that one organization couldn't dominate the media market across this country. I think one of the things that we need to look at is not just what's going on with media stations like, say, TV and radio, but now how is that changing with regard to some of these online streaming services? For example, one of the things I've talked about often is TikTok, which is still owned by a Chinese company, and how it dominates the news for young people, say, age 18 to 25, many of them whom get their news from TikTok. So that's one of the things that I think if we're going to look at some of these rules, we should be bringing in as the larger picture, not just what we're doing for TV and radio, but how are we making sure that streaming services are included, and what are the protections of making sure that one company doesn't become too dominant in providing news to any local market.
We have been meeting with members of Congress across both the House and the Senate, both political parties, as a result of the case that we've been making, which is that unfortunately, as a result of some of these limitations on our ability to compete, local stations aren't able to invest in our newsrooms the way that we otherwise would. I think all of these policymakers have seen what has happened with local newspapers. Restrictions on local newspapers' ability to gain scale, to enable them to receive fair compensation from the big tech giants, came far too late, and we're trying to prevent broadcasters from going that same direction. So as a result of these conversations with members of Congress, 20 senators have written to the FCC urging them to modernize these rules. More than 70 House members. A number of right of center groups have written to this administration and the FCC talking about the need for a free market that allows local broadcasters to better compete to serve our viewers, and numerous community groups that rely on local broadcasting. So I think we are very much making that case. I also think it's important for your viewers to realize this. What we're not asking for is any waiver in the antitrust laws here. So these restrictions are put in place by the FCC. We'd like to see those modernized, but any transaction purchase of a local broadcast station is still going to be reviewed by the Department of Justice, just as any business would have to deal with. And I think that limits the ability of any one company to gain too much market power. So we're not looking for any sort of exception from those rules. We're looking to compete on a level playing field.
Do you have a cap number in mind, or would you not have a cap, or how would that work? Because right now it's 39% penetration into American homes over the air.
Yeah, what we're asking the FCC for is to eliminate their cap on the reach of any one company. That doesn't mean, though, that the Justice Department, in reviewing a transaction, couldn't make the determination that for the sake of competition, as well as the market power of any one company, that there couldn't be some limitations that they might apply to the marketplace. But I think what this recognizes is that broadcasters don't simply compete against one another. When we're competing for audience, when we're competing for those sports programming rights, we're competing with tech giants. We're competing with all forms of programming, podcasts, streaming. And so this is just a matter of ensuring that we've got the ability to fight for that same programming and put together a product that will enable us to serve your viewers in the same way that everybody else in media can do.
We talked about newspaper a little bit and its issues, and I want to give an example and to kind of throw this back and see what your reaction to this is. In Nebraska, um, Lee Enterprises owned the Lincoln Journal-Star. Some years ago, Berkshire Hathaway sold their newspapers to Lee Enterprises. So Warren Buffett's newspapers went to Lee, and that included the Omaha World Herald, the Grand Island Independent, the Kearney Hub, North Platte Telegraph. There might have been some others in there. When Lee got a hold of those newspapers, it became, we're cutting people. And they started letting people go. And the Grand Island Independent and the Kearney Hub specifically, because they're on our market, have far fewer people in their newsroom now.
Yeah.
My comparison would be is what would the NAB like to see if, I'm just going to throw names out, if Gray, if Sinclair, if Hearst, if Scripps, whoever goes and buys more television stations than they currently have to avoid more consolidation in newsrooms in this market. And I'm not speaking for Sinclair, our parent company, but for Gray, I do know that in the North Platte market, which is the smallest or second smallest market in the country, they no longer produce their own morning show or 11:30 a.m. newscast. They simply simulcast from the Hastings station down the road. That means they have less people there. That means people are out of jobs in the North Platte market. How does the NAB stand to prevent having smaller newsrooms, less people in those local markets?
So there's no panacea to what's happening in the larger media marketplace. Facebook and Google have for the past decade plus moved into local communities, siphoned away local advertising dollars, and that has been the biggest cause of what has hurt local newspapers. Broadcasters are very much filling that void, as you know well, and you're sitting here as a representative of that. Look, you name checked a few large broadcast groups. The reality is there are more than 50 companies across this country that own local broadcast stations. We are not approaching anything close to a world where one or two companies have national scale and are buying up every broadcast station. We're looking simply for a little bit more ability to compete, gain some scale so that we can better invest in some of these newsrooms. I'm not sure that every market in the country, North Platte you use as an example, can necessarily support multiple independent newsrooms in that marketplace, but the FCC's rules pretend that they can. And that's the challenge that we're up against. And look, if you zoom out here, what has happened to the newspaper industry? There are news deserts all across the country that aren't served at all by a local newspaper. We want to ensure that there is some broadcast presence in every market in the country. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be some spaces where the size of the newsrooms, the amount of local programming isn't greater in certain markets than others. But my job is to ensure that there's a local, vibrant presence across the country. And I think some modernization in these rules is the best way to get there.
I've been being told, I've been in this market, in this industry for close to 18 years.
Yeah.
And I've been told probably since the beginning, I started in 2007, maybe even before when I was in college, that local TV is dying. And the linear aspect of it is going to go away and it's going to move to digital. And that's where it's going to be. And I've heard that multiple times over the past 2 decades. Does this move help prevent that and keep the linear active? Is there a concern that if this doesn't happen, then we get closer and closer to that point where linear local news goes away? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think inaction by the Federal Communications Commission just simply is not an option. We see the world around us, the ability of all of our competitors who aren't doing what local broadcasters are doing. They're not there in times of emergency with boots on the ground when other forms of communication fail. They are not freely available, and they aren't trusted and present in their local communities. Distrust of national media and national institutions is at an all-time high. We need local broadcasters now more than ever. So we need the ability to compete. I think we're already seeing, just given the deluge of disinformation on social media, a renewed appreciation for what trusted local broadcast does. I think you are seeing that in your local market. You know, our audiences are waking up to how local broadcasts, which have often been taken for granted, are really differentiated from the rest of media. I don't see that changing, but we need better ability on our business side to make all of these pieces fit together and make it work. And that means competing for programming rights, competing for audience, competing for those valuable advertising dollars. And my view is that modernizing these restrictions will help us do that.
I guess I'll kind of wrap up with two questions, and you can answer them both at the same time or however you want to do it.
Sure.
Do you see this getting done in 2025? And then also, if and when it does get done, do you see the larger companies going in and buying more and expanding and doing that sort of thing? Because you talked about how right now there's over 50 companies that own local television stations in the market. Here in Nebraska, we're a farm state, and there's a lot of farmland, but there's a lot fewer farmers because they're being owned by more, less entities, whether they're individuals or companies. Does that consolidation become more of a thing if the cap gets lifted or changed, or is that a concern or whatnot?
So first and foremost, in terms of the timing for action here, the FCC is currently at the top, not operating at a full capacity. There are only two sitting FCC commissioners, and they need a third to have a quorum. So they're in a little bit of a standstill right now. That third commissioner has been nominated and is awaiting confirmation by the United States Senate. I expect that to happen in short order here, meaning sometime over the next month or two. I think once there is a full commission, thanks to really the work of viewers across the country who have reached out to their members of Congress talking about the importance of modernizing these rules because of the necessity of locally focused news. As well as these members of Congress who have ensured that this issue is top of mind for the current FCC chairman, Brendan Carr. I do think that there will be some movement on this in short order. As I think all of your viewers know, things in Washington, D.C. don't tend to necessarily move as quickly as we would all like. There's a process that the FCC has to move through where they will solicit some public comment to actually get any rule changes over the finish line. We just want to ensure there's an openness to this perspective. And what we've urged Chairman Carr and his colleagues is to have an open mind about this and to be willing to take a fresh look. And I have every expectation that they will be willing to do that. But I'm not going to put a specific date on it, as much to say that every day that goes by where broadcasters aren't able to fairly compete is one where local communities are being deprived for the very best of what we could do.
Sounds good. President and CEO of the NAB, Curtis LeGeyt, thank you so much for giving me a few minutes today. And I'm kind of an industry dork, and I kind of enjoy keeping an eye on all this type of stuff. So I'll be looking forward to seeing how it all plays out over the next several months or year or however long it takes.
Thanks so much.